They were out early one morning, panning in the stream for gold, surrounded by the rising mountains. Old prospector with a tale for two, he brushed around in the pan, pointing out what lay within was ordinary sand. He began with his story about 20 years before, and a younger man who sought his fortune. With a tear or two he told of searching for his treasure, but making known the gold he sought was ordinary pleasure. There were years of doing without, and there were years of plenty. I started thinking that life was never steady, excepting when the bills came in and I had no money to pay. Whiskey had never tasted better ordinarily. He concluded his story as it filled the air with a laugh, saying how he found the Lord and Savior, and how I found the river of life by which his day unfolds, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. Through His word we can see His wonders, signs and miracles of His love. We can return His love with devotion, standing on His word before all men. We are His beloved and His chosen, walking in this life renewed with peace. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. can see his wonders, signs and miracles of his love. We can return his love with devotion, standing on his word before all men. We are his beloved and his chosen, walking in this life renewed with peace. Trust in God, believe upon his promises. Trust in God, believe upon his promises. Believe upon.
All right, God bless you all. I'm Mark Wallace. This is True North Studio, and today the topic is Turn the Hearts of the Fathers to the Children. Now, we all know about the benefits of having a good father in the home, and we know about the devastation caused by a bad one. Israel had gone through centuries of changes, most not so good. Families were being torn apart by societal changes, by government power grabs, and by a real slow shift in morals. God knew that before the Christ could be received, that the hearts of the fathers would once again need to return to their children. God even mentions this absent father thing twice, so it's kind of a big deal. They're almost identical prophecies in the Bible, separated by about 400 years, that talk about the necessity of fathers reconnecting with their children. The first one was given with the last tired breath of the Old Testament, about 400 BC, by the prophet Malachi. And the second one was given 4 centuries later by an angel to the parents of Jesus' older cousin. Here's the first, Malachi 4, 5 and 6. Behold, I will send you Elijah, the prophet, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord, which means the day of great reverence before the Messiah appears. And he, that prophet who's like Elijah, shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to the fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. Malachi said that a prophet will be sent, similar to the amazing Elijah, and he would be tasked to reunite families so that people would be ready to receive the promised one, the Messiah, the Christ. Now, if you knew what the original Elijah was asked by God to do in his day and time to reunite families, you would see that this is no small task. The second similar prophecy came after a very long, very dark, and very murderous 400-year hiatus from any prophet or prophecy, written or spoken. Families were worse off than they were in Malachi's day. Now it's almost the 1st century, and one of God's angels clears his throat and basically repeated the same revelation God gave to Malachi. As you know, when a prophecy is repeated in Scripture, it's kind of important. Luke 1:17. And he shall go before him in the spirit and power of Elias, that's Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. The heavenly messenger of God told a childless middle-aged couple that they were going to have a son, and this young man would prepare the way for the Messiah. Plus, the angel also said this young man would walk with the same spiritual power as Elijah, which also means that he would face the same things that Elijah did. Okay? And this child would be tasked with turning the hearts of the fathers back to their children in Israel. Gulp. Imagine if God asked you to raise your only child to do those 3 things. Where would you start? What would you do? What would your parenting strategies be? This second Elijah-like young man, this family builder, this man who would prepare all Israel to receive the Messiah, would be none other than John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus Christ. Now, those two verses tell us that there must be some connection between fathers loving their kids and people receiving the Christ. They also scream its unspoken opposite. It also makes me think, how was one man going to accomplish this in his one short life if Israel had failed for 400 years? Twice it was prophesied that this Elijah-like fellow would prepare the way for the Christ, and twice it was spoken that he would turn the hearts of the fathers to the children. Why this father and child reunion? It sounds so sweet. Let's get dads reconnecting with their kids. Is there more to that statement than meets the eye? Why is a loving, cohesive family unit necessary before the Messiah could appear? But no matter how hard I studied, I couldn't see where Elijah or John the Baptizer worked with deadbeat dads to take better care of their children. I couldn't even find out if John the Baptist was a father himself. I didn't see either one start a social program, a charity, or a foundation, or write a book. I never saw a verse, where a little girl invited her dad to a tea party with tiny pink plastic cups and glittering tiaras. I never saw where a reminder popped up on Dad's phone prompting him to come out of his office and throw the ball around before dinner. There had to be something else, something deeper. What did the prophet and angel know that we don't know? What did Elijah do that helped fathers connect with their kids way back in his day? How did John prepare the way for the Christ? And the connection might surprise you. So, what was John the Baptist up against? Well, the interval between the Old Testament and the New Testament is a dark period in the history of Israel. It covers about 4 centuries, during which there was neither a prophet nor inspired writer in Israel. Everything we know about that spiritually dark time period, we owe to the historian Josephus, to a few scattered references by Greek and Roman historians, and the thoughts written in a few apocryphal books that were unearthed years and years later. Israel was brutalized and taken over by other countries and cultures maybe 6 times during those 4 centuries. To survive, they had to find a way to live under the rule of another country, and this changed Israel. Look at how your own country's changed in the past 400 years, for the good and the bad. Governments have changed, religions have changed, morals have changed, education's changed, conquerors and immigrants have moved in and out, bringing in their own cultures and beliefs. People intermixed, religions interbred, wars have taken place, which changed people and society in ways both good and bad. Now let's take an abbreviated look at what happened in the world during those 400 or so years before John the Baptist. Dates are approximate. So see if you can pick out anything that may have helped or hurt what would happen in the 1st century. See if you can find what happened to godly fatherhood. The Persian era, 536 to 336 BC. The current world power, the war-hungry Persians, now Iran, conquered Israel again. And during this conquest, the local synagogues slowly morphed into centers of worship as opposed to complete dependence on the temple in Jerusalem. It also began to regionalize the seat of religious power away from Jerusalem, spread it out across Israel. The Persians decentralized religious power. This would come in handy when the new Christians spread around the world, house to house, after Pentecost. Now the Greek era, 336 to 323 BC. The Persians were run out of Israel by the young Greek military genius called Alexander the Great. The man was in his 20s. His reign lasted only 13 years, but he changed everything on earth. And during his few short years, he conquered Persia, Babylon, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, and Western India. Although he died at 33, his influence lives on even today. Young Alexander was determined to start a worldwide empire that was united by language, custom, and the Greek civilization. This process is called Hellenization. Hellenization. Did you know that even today the Greeks refer to themselves as Hellenes and not Greeks? The Romans are the ones who first called them Greek. Under Alexander's influence, the entire known world began to speak and study the Greek language, including the people of Israel. Knowing Greek opened Israel up to all the knowledge of the world, good and bad. They also began to adopt parts of the Greek culture, which meant they were introduced to multiple gods and superstitions. Even you have been influenced by Greek culture. You too have been Hellenized, not in language, but in mindset and Western thinking. Hellenism became so popular that it persisted even into the New Testament times and into your house. Now the Egyptian Greek era, 323 to 198 BC. After Alexander died, one of his generals, Ptolemy Soter, who had recently conquered Egypt, came back up from Egypt and took over Israel. At first, he treated the Judeans very harshly, but later his successors softened their grip and actually tried to get along with the people. This was not the Egypt you think about in your Ten Commandments movies. It was more like a mini modern educated Greece with an Egyptian flavor by now. The people walked more like Greeks than Egyptians. During this time, because the Greek language was so widespread, they translated the Hebrew scriptures into the Greek. This translation is called the Septuagint. Now this was huge. Now the educated people of the world had access to the Hebrew Bible. This was a first. But not all the Judeans wanted to be Hellenized because it wasn't just the Greek culture or the Greek language that crept into Israel, it was their way of life. It caused a rift and a split in the population. Now here's a funny fact. The Greek influence actually caused Israel to place ritual above heart, causing the Orthodox or Hasidic party bringing the Orthodox or Hasidic party into the scene. The Hellenized Egyptians were actually more religious in the worship of their gods than the Jews. They out-Jewed the Jews. Now the Syrian era, 198 to 165 BC. Now over 300 years have passed, since the prophet Malachi. Israel's gone through 3 takeovers so far. The Syrians, the Greeks, and the Hellenized Egyptians. If you think things weren't already mixed up enough in Israel, their ancient enemy, Syria, the next country up on the map, now came down and defeated the Greek-speaking Egyptians living in Israel. Now you got to know, these so-called Syrians were also run by Greek leaders who split off and took over when Alexander died. Syria was also Hellenized. The Greek culture that Alexander had started way back when was still moving, growing, and integrating and morphing. The Syrians had their Greek handlers, treated everyone in Israel harshly, but they still allowed the high priest to maintain a modicum of power. So things ran smoothly for a bit until the new Hellenist party, which is the Greek-loving Judeans, replaced the true high priest with the person they wanted in power, a person who was not in the genetic lineage of Aaron, the high priest line. Gasp. This irked half the population so much that things broke out into out-and-out revolt, and the Syrians, think Greeks commanding Syrians, they set about destroying anything that resembled the Jewish faith. Now this was something. The Hellenistic leader of Syria, Antiochus, forbade sacrifice, banned circumcision, stopped the Sabbath, and would allow no sacred feast. Antiochus thought of himself as God manifest or Zeus incarnate. As you can imagine, there was no ego involved with him. And I say this tongue in cheek. His refusal to allow them to worship God the way Israel had done for centuries brought about a stinging hatred for these pagan invaders. enter the Maccabees. The Maccabean era, 165 to 63. Now remember, this all happened since Malachi, okay? And there's a reason I'm saying all this. Now the Maccabean era. The people of Israel finally sick and tired of Hellenistic rule, so a group of Judean rebels, a group who called themselves the Maccabees, armed themselves, retook Jerusalem, and expelled the armies of Antiochus. And the memory of this great event is still celebrated by the Jewish people each year during Hanukkah, which you've heard of. The Judeans seemed to finally win their political and religious independence for a minute. The only problem was they asked the Roman army for a little help just in case the Syrians came back. Oops. Now the Roman era, 63 to 313 AD. The Roman era began when one of the powerful Judean priests signed a treaty with the Senate of Rome looking for help in the event of another Syrian attack. It was this pact which first introduced Rome into the history of Israel. This didn't turn out well for Israel because General Pompey, who was fighting another war in the region, just came in and took over Israel. The Romans had become the world power. They snatched it away from the Greeks. The Romans set up their own leadership structure in Israel that once again had nothing to do with the priestly line of Aaron. A man called Herod the Great rose to power by killing everyone who was a threat to his position. He even killed his wife and 2 sons. Herod had been raised as both a Hellenist and a Judean. He did rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and he was on the throne when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Okay, this Herod is the guy who the Magi came to see when they were looking for the newborn king, who we know as Jesus Christ. He was also the guy who had every male child slaughtered in Bethlehem to try and kill baby Jesus before he could grow up. Problem was, an angel told Joseph to take Mary and the toddler Jesus to Hellenized Egypt. Section summary. About 400 years now have passed since the prophet Malachi boldly said, quote, before the Messiah could appear, that a prophet similar in power to the great man of God Elijah would have to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children. The only problem with that prophecy happening now was Israel had now been taken over 5 or 6 times by foreign invaders. The Greek or Hellenistic culture that rode in with Alexander the Great had now fully integrated into Judean society, and along with it came their traditions, their language, their laws, their sexual practices, and a smorgasbord of new gods and not a few corrupt politicians. Israel was now more divided than it had ever been. And some of the more liberal Judeans, the Sadducees, wholeheartedly embraced Hellenism, while on the other hand, the yang to the Sadducees' yin, an ultra-conservative party called the Pharisees, fought to maintain the old ways, the law of Moses. Problem was, these Pharisees took the law that was designed to help people and turned it into a noose, a club, and a cattle prod. The Pharisees out-Mosesed Moses. And like a funhouse mirror, first century Israel was now a warped reflection of its former glory. The stage is now set for a prophet like Elijah to prepare the way for Christ. But how could this be the ideal time to introduce the Christ? How could it be the right time? Now we're ready to enter the first century Israel. The scene set for the Christ to be born. But how does it all fit? What is this John the Baptizer going to have to do to prepare the way? You know, how is it possible for him to be like the amazing prophet Elijah? So before we get to John the Baptist and his younger cousin Jesus Christ, let's see what the original Elijah did to reunite families in ancient Israel. It will give us a clue as to the hill that John the Baptist was going to have to climb. What did Elijah do to get fathers loving their kids again? Now, we still haven't talked about what Elijah did way back when, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children in ancient Israel. Plus, we still need to see what Elijah version 2, John the Baptist, will need to do to prepare the way for the coming of the Christ by turning the hearts of the fathers to the children. What does it even mean? What is John the Baptist going to have to do to clean things up like Elijah did? What did Elijah really do? In some ways, I wish I never studied this topic. I wish I never studied this. I assumed that to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children was about getting fathers to love their children, to reestablish the beauty and unity of family, but it has much deeper, uglier, more sinister roots. During the time of the original Elijah, Israel was in a cultural tailspin, sort of like it was in the first century, sort of like your country is today. The political elites wanted nothing more than to integrate Israel and Judea into the popular culture of the world at that time. Sound familiar? What was this prevailing culture that Elijah beat his head against in ancient Israel? What was it about those values that separated children from their parents? And here's where things get rather messy. The accepted world culture in Elijah's time, including most of Israel, openly recognized mutilation of children, child sacrifice, free and open public sex in the name of God, small g, all under the guise of a state-run religion. Apparently, that way of life must be irresistible because every country on earth, dating back to prehistoric times, has participated in wanton promiscuity, child mutilation, and human sacrifice. Every country, every culture, every time period, including today, has sacrificed their children in some way, shape, or form. There's not a country on earth that's not participated in some sort of human sacrifice. None. From the Aztecs to Afghanistan, from India to Iraq, from Korea to Tanzania, from Chile to China, from Stonehenge to Pakistan, from Egypt to the Americas, from Haiti to Hawaii, all have stooped to that living hell. There is even a deep, dark valley just outside of Jerusalem called Hinnom, where much of this child sacrifice took place in Israel. It's said by some that this is the valley of death David sang about in Psalm 23. It's also where the idea of a hell on earth, or Gehenna, came from because of the constant fires and burning flesh. Open child sacrifice had all but stopped in the Roman-run Israel during Jesus' day, but the smoldering fires of the garbage dump had never stopped burning since antiquity. Jeremiah 31:40. And the whole valley of the dead bodies, and of the ashes, and all the fields unto the brook of Kidron, unto the corner of the horse gate towards the east, shall be holy unto the Lord, and it shall not be plucked down, nor thrown down any more forever. The false god Baal always goes after children. I'm going to say it again. The false god Baal always goes after children. Child sacrifice is always a part of his deal. It may not be as open or loud as it once was, but it was around during John the Baptist's day, and it's on the rise again today. There is not a country on earth that has not spilled the blood of their children, and all for what? Popularity, rain, crops, to secure the favor of a god, to purify some temple or building, to appease some deity, to gain land or resources, or worse, for financial gain? Ancient ritualistic Baal worship looked a little like this. Adults would gather around the altar of Baal, people would cut themselves and their kids, infants would then be burned alive as a sacrificial offering to the deity. Amid horrific screams and the stench of charred human flesh, the congregation, here's what happens right after that. The congregation, man, woman, and child, would engage in sexual, bisexual, pedophilia, and multisexual orgies. What we see today is the inbred, tattooed digital cousin of Baal and Moloch worship. The same old devils, different day, still want, no, they demand the same pound of flesh they've received for all of human history. These spirits and yes, I'm going to say spirits, will manipulate as many politicians and religious leaders as they can employ. And their people will always just go along with it. People just go along with it. You don't believe me? You think I'm sensationalizing this? Think again, dads. You say, good thing this could never happen in our modern society, but it does. It does. Are the gods Baal and Moloch still hungry for human sacrifice? Well, do modern people still worship at their digital altar under a different name? All you have to do is follow the money and the blood trail. Follow the money and follow the blood. Do children still get cut today? Are babies still being sacrificed for profit or for an easier life for the parents? Are our young men and women still being sent off to be slaughtered by the thousands? Do people still come home missing body parts? Has the beauty of sex been cheapened and manipulated, been sensationalized for profit and entertainment? This is what Elijah and John the Baptist had to deal with. Elijah in practice and John in mindset. Israel had changed over the past 400 years, and this is still what we have to deal with today. There is not a country or society who has not participated in these killing fields. There's not a country on earth that doesn't still do the bidding of Baal and the molestations of Moloch. You know, Elijah had to deal with the super evil Jezebel. She sent out kill squads to eliminate all the prophets of God. All the prophets of God. Are people today trying to shut down, silence, or water down Christianity? Are they? Jezebel wanted to remove anyone or anything who tried to stop child mutilation and sacrifice and the wonderful, crazy, wanton, open sex that always followed the sacrificial service. This is sort of like the bumper sticker of the 70s. If it feels good, do it. Or the popular song stanza. If you're not with the one you love the one you're with. You know, one time Elijah was hiding out in a desert cave, scared for his life and feeling quite alone. In fact, he actually thought he was the only one left in Israel who still loved and worshiped God. How bad was Israel? How would that make you feel if you thought you were the only Christian left on earth? 1 Kings 19:14, and he said, I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword. And I, even I only am left, and they seek my life to take it away. This is what he told God. So did he feel alone? Israel's king Ahab and his psycho wife Jezebel wanted to kill him. They meant business, and it scared the pea willy out of Elijah. He thought he was the only believer left on earth. God saw things from a different perspective. 1 Kings 19:18. This is what God said. Yet have I left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not kissed him. Now, I've already told you what bowing to Baal meant, okay? Sounds like a lot, but how many people were living in Israel at the time? Okay, now 7,000 sounds like a lot of people, right? Yeah. Okay, but how many people were living in Israel at that time? Now, we're really not sure, but we do know that just a few years earlier, King David had counted the fighting men of Israel and calculated that there were 800,000 men in Israel who could handle a sword, and another 500,000 fighting men who lived in Judea. So if you include women and children, a rough estimate would be that there were 2.5 to 3 million people in Israel at that time. Think about it. If only 7,000 people in all of Israel had not given into this horrific Baal worship, that means that only 0.25% of Israel was faithful to the Lord. That's a pretty low number of believers, but it gives Elijah a number to work with. Elijah went back and directly confronted the king who was trying to kill him. He then confronted the fake prophets of Baal and challenged them on their beliefs. That could be quite scary. He was willing to lay down his life for the good of the families and to take back Israel. In the original Elijah's day, that was the way he turned the hearts of the father to the children. He ran into the fray. He ran into the fight. What are we willing to do? Dads, moms, sons, daughters? You know, John the Baptist was similar in how he approached his calling to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and to prepare the path for the Messiah. By this time, human sacrifice was frowned on by Rome unless they did it for political reasons, for entertainment, or for sports. Then it was okay. Then it was A-okay with the Romans. But the 400 dark years and 6 takeovers had taken a toll on Israel. Israel is now fully Hellenized, Romanized, paganized, and was more legalistic than Moses. But a ragged few were trying to claw their way back to God. John was the man for the job. Mark 1:4 from the NLT. This messenger was John the Baptist. He was in the wilderness and preached that people should be baptized to show that they had repented of their sins and turned to God to be forgiven. John lived hard. John lived hard. He lived off the land. The guy ate bugs, you know, and he found a way to both turn fathers back to their children and prepare the hearts of people to receive the Christ. Now, this is no small task. John 1, verse 20 from the NIV. He, John the Baptist, did not fail to confess, but he confessed freely, I am not the Christ. They asked him, then who are you? Are you Elijah? He said, I am not. Are you that prophet? He said, nope. Finally, they said, who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself? And John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, I am the voice of the one calling in the desert. Make straight the way of the Lord. John knew his purpose, to clear the path for Jesus. That's the same path that you're on. Jesus declared John the Baptist was the greatest man to have ever been born. Jesus said that. Matthew 11:11 from the NIV. I tell you the truth. Among those born of women, there has not risen another or anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. Makes you think. John the Baptist challenged the people of Israel to prepare themselves for the coming of the Messiah by turning back onto the Word. He was also inspired to use baptism as a symbol of that repentance. John held no power or influence in the Jewish political system, but he delivered his message with force and authority. The regular people couldn't resist the overwhelming truth of his words, and people flocked to him by the thousands to hear him speak and to be baptized. John never forgot his mission, to point people to the Christ. John also directly confronted King Herod Antipas about his sexual improprieties. This couldn't have been easy. Strangely, this caused the king's stepdaughter to ask for John's head on a platter. And you know something? She got it. You know, and there's that human sacrifice mixed with sex again. You know, I'm sure if we scratch the surface a bit in our particular countries, we will see the same type of worship, only it will be called something different, and it will be done behind thick closed doors or by the blue light of a computer screen. So what do we do with this information? What do we do with it? How does this affect fathers and families today? Now, I could go on and on about the evils of modern society and how we're still doing a sanitized version of Baal worship in our countries. I could show you how human sacrifice is still a clear and present danger. I could show you how parents are, even today, still mutilating and sacrificing their children for notoriety, acceptance, personal gain, and for clicks and likes. I could easily show you how nothing's really changed when it comes to blood sacrifice. Only it's been tamed, renamed, rebranded, and whitewashed. Don't even get me started with the spiritual power behind pedophilia and the allure of obscure sex. There's nothing wrong with sex. Boy. I'm sorry, this thing jumped ahead on me here. So there's nothing wrong with that stuff. There's nothing wrong, until it gets way off the reservation and people get hurt and die. Excuse me for a second, folks. Had some technical difficulty. And what's that? Okay, I don't know where that is. And so here we go. Yeah, let me look at this one. This will be better. Sorry about that, folks. I know this is some heavy stuff. And but isn't a real man supposed to be able to carry a heavy load? Yeah, he is. So how do we turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children? How can adults reconnect with the kids? How do we keep our kids and our grandkids from giving up and giving in to the siren's call? Like Elijah, we speak out against evil. We speak up for the truth, and we do whatever it is in our power to put a ding in this world, this universe, this society. You may never have unfettered access to the leader of your country, but you can do something. You can let your light shine a bit brighter in whatever circle you're in. A few years ago, one of my friends wrote a letter to the President of the United States on how to relieve tensions in the Middle East. And lo and behold, it was read and used, but he was given no credit for his help. But it changed relations in the Middle East nonetheless. Your words make a difference, especially if they're written down and said with love. Another person I know worked in White House communications and was able to interact with 2 sitting presidents, their families, and many of the politicians. Did she make a difference? Probably. Some of you wage war on this world with your blogs, your emails, and on social media. It all makes a difference. Keep up the good work. You don't always, have to go hard against evil. Just teach what's right, radiant and loving. And sometimes it's okay just to joke about all these crazy things. Sing your songs. Post those blogs, prepare your podcast, talk up your truth. Now, I need to throw a disclaimer in here. Stop condemning yourself if your child didn't listen to you and got absorbed into the foolishness of this world. It's your job as a parent to love and to teach and to direct and to protect. It's the kid's job to listen. Now, the cool thing is, as we train up a child in the way that he should go, they usually come back to roost on what you taught them, eventually. Proverbs 22:6, especially when they have kids on their own. And be thankful you didn't have a child like me. Lord have mercy. But don't give up on kids like I was, please. In my mid-teens, I had left home. I lived nowhere and everywhere. Somehow I got witnessed to, it seems like every day, by Jesus freaks in the early 70s. But I didn't hear a word. At least I thought I didn't. Isaiah 55:11. So shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void, but it shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I sent it. The word never comes back void. Never. Never, never, never. It always accomplishes its God-given task every time you speak the word. Then there's the sunscreen principle to raising children. Apply and reapply. Deuteronomy 6, verse 4 from the voice. Moses. Listen, Israel, the Eternal is our true God. He alone. You should love Him, your true God, with all your heart and soul, with every ounce of your strength. Make the things I'm commanding you today part of who you are. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them while you're sitting together in your home and when you're walking together down the road. Make them the last thing you talk about before you go to bed and the first thing you talk about the next morning. Do whatever it takes to remember them. Tie a reminder on your hand. Bind a reminder around your forehead where you'll see it all the time, such as on the doorpost where you cross the threshold of your city gate. What it's saying here is to constantly remind your kids of what's important and true and right. Like a mom at the beach with her orange tube of sunblock for her kids, we apply and we reapply. We keep reminding our kids of the Word. That's how you save a child. Ephesians 4:15, but speak in the truth in love, may grow up into Him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. That's how we save a society. Now, we can still prepare the way for Christ to enter someone's heart, for light to overpower darkness, for the Spirit of God to destroy the works of evil. It will happen, folks. It is happening right now. 2 Timothy 4:2 sums it up nicely from the Phillips. Never lose your sense of urgency. In season or out of season, prove, correct, and encourage using the utmost patience in your teaching. Same thing from the Message. Proclaim the message with intensity. Keep on your watch, challenge, warn, and urge your people. Don't ever quit. Just keep it simple. The God's Word version. Be ready to spread the word whether or not the time is right. Point out errors, warn people, and encourage them. Be very patient when you teach. That's how you save a planet. I'm not asking you to go to war. I'm just asking you to live your gift. Let your light shine. Do what God called you to do, and then tell others. And be patient. That's the way to save a life. That's a way to save a country. That's a way to save a child. That's a way to save a generation. And that's the way to save our world. And that's how we turn the hearts of fathers back to their children, by speaking God's Word. Happy Father's Day.